Welcome everybody to a very special day. It's a Sunday. The weather's nice outside. Winter's not quite here yet. That's why it's special. We're also discussing the Accelerate Manifesto for an Accelerationist politics, which is something that has been probably, if you've hung out with NSP much, and that is the group that this is, NSP, New Symbolization Project. If you've hung out around us much, it's something you might hear offhandedly, Accelerationist, online. I think you see it, thrown around here and there. And often it's kind of used in a kind of way where people are just kind of, really what they mean is like, well, something like giving up on making any kind of real change or fighting capitalism, and it just kind of means leaning in and pushing it through to its logical conclusions that are hopefully going to outgrow capitalism into something better. There's a little more to it than that, and so the manifesto is a pretty good place to start for a conversation on that. We're going to be joined by Jacob Van Gies, who's been with us for a lot of our videos in the past, but also was here 2 weeks ago for our Responding to Jordan Peterson conference. And he's written a little bit on accelerationism, so we're really happy that he was able to join. Also, we're being joined by Eric. I don't know what your background is with accelerationism or accelerationist politics, but what we'll do is we'll just kind of like open it up to going around. People can make some comments on their own background with it so far. Like, do you understand any of it? Did you read any of it? What do you think about it? Or you can pass, you just say how your day's been or something like that, but make sure to say your name, preferred pronouns, what you're up to. So I'm Dave, and I think I pretty much like the manifesto a lot. I think it's really well written. And I'll leave it at that because I've got a lot of opinions and I'll hold off on them for a little bit. Oh, and Eddie just got here and he brought pizza. Welcome, Eddie.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so we'll just go around. Start with Quinn and yeah.
I'm Quinn. I use they them. I really like the manifesto. It definitely had like a left accelerationist rather than a right accelerationist bias, I think. I'll talk about that later. A lot of my friends are accelerationists. I've read a little bit of Nick Land, so that's pretty much my background in accelerationist politics so far.
Also they them, sorry. Yeah.
Well, I have read the manifesto several weeks ago. And it's striking that there's a left wing and a right wing to it. And the right wing wants to push it in order to bring about the technological singularity, i.e. rapture of the nerds, which I thought was an interesting orthogonal angle to it. And if nothing else, I want to see how these two camps play themselves out with this particular idea.
I'm Mel, she, her, and this is like, I briefly glimpsed over the article earlier today in between all my math homework and getting ready for coming here. So I kind of wanted to use this to just like listen back and hear what you all have to say and think about it.
Just saying about the manifesto. I think it's a manifesto. It's a great example of how leaders and social movements are not acting properly in trying to fight capitalism. So there is a new has some solutions in some parts of this article. Great ideas to start the revolution. Maybe a reformation or something.
Thanks, Eddie. Then we'll go Eric, Jacob, and Mikey in that order.
I don't know, does the microphone work?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, awesome. So I got into accelerationism with my reading circle maybe a few months ago. So we heard about this idea, and we read a couple texts like the Accelerationist Manifesto. I found very interesting the one talk from Ray Brassier about Nick Land's accelerationism, where this whole idea comes from a theoretical level, and how Land goes from this theoretical level to practical political implications, and the question, okay, how does left accelerationism have to behave towards these Landian theoretical points? And I think that's a very interesting point, this intersection of theoretical and political thing. Maybe because I think one important point in this one talk of Brassier is that Land came from a critical theory background, but then said, okay, no, critical theory isn't radical enough, and then went from there to his standpoint where he is basically now. And I think that's an interesting movement to track.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jacob. You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I read this text the first time a long time ago. I think I used to be more sympathetic to accelerationism than I am now. I have some theoretical problems with it. Most prominently, the fact that I think something like Afro-pessimism provides a really good critique of accelerationism, insofar as accelerationism isn't capable of thinking outside. It only thinks inside. But that's a little bit beside the point. I've done a little bit of work in accelerationism. I wrote a paper about Detroit, where I posit sort of an accelerationist project for the city of Detroit, in terms of thinking how Cernusek and Williams' concept of I think how do they distinguish speed and acceleration? So they suggest it's in section 2.2. They suggest that Landian neoliberalism confuses speed with acceleration. And Jaden Adams has done some interesting work. He has an interview with Paul Virilio. And in the introduction to that interview, which is available online, he talks about Gilles Deleuze's use of Nietzsche, which is he posits that this sort of speed or one of the one that's good, the one that Cernusek and Williams are using, is the sort of yes that knows how to say no. So he posits this distinction between Nick Land, whose acceleration is just a yes to everything. It's just a yes, 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 yes. And against that, there's the no saying, which just says no to everything, which is sort of like a Hegelian dialectic, which is saying at least some perverse reading of the Hegelian dialectic that just says no to everything, and posits that for Deleuze and Nietzsche, there's a yes that knows how to say no. And Jaden has suggested to me that this is what's going on in the Accelerationist Manifesto. And I drew upon that to suggest that this sort of selective affirmation, where you're selecting what is affirmed and what is accelerated, could be beneficial to certain political structures. And I was looking at Detroit specifically in that paper. I'm also interested in the theorist Paul Virilio in relation to accelerationism. Again, influenced by Jaden Adams' reading of Virilio as a thing. Well, Virilio is a thinker of speed and acceleration. So Virilio is very important to thinking about acceleration, though typically Virilio is understood as more of a pessimistic sort of thinker, more of a thinker of braking than a thinker of acceleration. So there's some interesting theory to be done there. I don't know, a little bit about me. I'm a student at the Western University Center for the Study of Theory and Criticism. I'm hoping to do my master's thesis on Friedrich Nietzsche and the concept of immoralism. And yeah, that's me. So Michael, you get to go now. Unless you're at a coffee shop and can't talk.
No, I'm here. Yeah, I like this manifesto. Whether or not you agree with the central premise of accelerationism, which is acceleration, I think this manifesto serves as a really wonderful contextualization of our current global predicament. And it's almost, I think, as important to get our context in clear view as it is to try to posit answers. And so whether or not someone agrees with what accelerationism, at least left accelerationism, has to say, I think the manifesto in particular is really great at getting somebody attuned to our current situation. And I like it a lot for that. Just to piggyback off of what Jacob said, I do think that distinction is an important one to have in mind as we think through our current situation. But the distinction between speed and acceleration, Jaden Adams, I've talked to him about it too, and he likes this analogy of the difference between running faster on the ground, which would be acceleration, and running faster on a treadmill, where you keep increasing the speed, but you don't go anywhere. You stay in the same location. And speed is precisely what we're locked into with the neoliberalism that holds sway right now. And things just move faster and faster, but we don't go anywhere. And accelerationism is an attempt to take that speed, go with it, but actually deterritorialize, take society to a new place. And so I'm interested in those types of ideas.
So I love that analogy. That one gives me a way better sense, because it said that too. There was like a passage. They didn't make it as clear as that analogy, I think, makes it, but yet, you can accelerate. Yeah, you can have speed within the system, or you can have acceleration, which is really like, it seems like they are the left that is okay with the idea that we are guiding our evolution and that we have a responsibility to seize the knowledge and means of that evolution and have an ongoing conversation about how we want to progress, rather than this sort of, oh, we can all just sit in circles, learn to use each other's pronouns, be really cognizant of like one another's feelings, and then neoliberalism will do what it does, and then we'll hopefully supersede this bullshit eventually, right? And it's like, no, we need to literally seize the means of cultural and technological production at fucking every level. But I like that idea if that's the dichotomy we find ourselves in. But okay. So really quick though, because I know for a fact that 2 people did not do the reading, and that's good, because also there will be people who watch this on YouTube who are they didn't watch the reading either. They're trying to get a basic sense of what accelerationism is. So far we've covered some things. What are some other key points you think? Maybe some passages we want to read or share, or just anything essential that you can kind of pull out?
You know, I think right now with how much nostalgia we see going on in culture, you know, we have Vaporwave, we have Stranger Things, Ready Player One. I think that one passage on the impossibility of returning to a Fordist society, post-war society, I think that's an important insight to carry with us as we think through things, because there's such a nostalgia right now for the good old days of consumption that I think it's important for us on the left to be able to tell people why that type of nostalgia is dangerous and leading, and to be able to articulate the problems that all of the simulations, to talk like Baudrillard, all of the signs of equality, signs of justice, signs of freedom that didn't have any real reference in the post-war society. We need to be able to articulate the problems with, you know, Western society from, you know, 45 on up to the end of the 90s, because yeah, there's the neoliberal shift at the beginning of the 80s, but ultimately the overarching consumer society, it's a thing of the past, and we know that it was built on racism and sexism, and it had all these structural issues with it, and yet you see this kind of nostalgia for it circulating. And so, you know, they have that great passage on the problems with the post-war society, and I think that's important.
Yeah, you also shared that on your Facebook today, which, you know, the we can't return to the Fordism one, and I'm just wondering if you'd take a second to elaborate on the difference between Fordism and neoliberalism.
Well, I mean, if we're talking in materialistic terms, it's just the idea that Fordism was built on the factory work, right? We live in a service-based economy. There are no factory jobs, and let's be honest, we don't want those fucking jobs to come back anyway. It was terrible work, right? You know, yeah, they offered job security, and that's better than being the precariat in a certain sense, but those jobs were fucking terrible, and nobody wants to have those horrible factory jobs that were shipped off to the third world. And that's basically what they're getting at is here, let me just read the quote, right? They say, "We do not want a return to Fordism. There can be no return to Fordism. The capitalist golden era was premised on the production paradigm of the orderly factory environment, where male workers received security and a basic standard of living in return for a lifetime of stultifying boredom and social repression. Such a system relied upon an international hierarchy of colonies and empires and an underdeveloped periphery, a national hierarchy of racism and sexism, a rigid family hierarchy of female subjugation. For all the nostalgia many may feel, this regime is both undesirable and practically impossible to return to." I think they said it better than I ever could. So,
Welcome, Hudson.
hey, just before I forget, I'm going to leave it in the sidebar, but through my discussions with Jaden Adams on accelerationism, he gave me 3 key quotes. One is from Deleuze and Guattari and Anti-Oedipus. One is from Nietzsche, and one is from Marx. And in all 3 of them, you see a certain accelerationist leaning and almost kind of like a larval form of accelerationism. And so these 3 quotes are pretty important to for how they influence accelerationist thought. So I'm just going to leave them here in the sidebar.
We'll pay some pizza emojis in the sidebar so you can all join us in this feast.
I think, where is it? One quote I liked. I can't find the quote right now, but oh, here it is. We do not present any particular organization as the ideal means to embody these vectors. What is needed, what has always been needed, is an ecology of organizations, a pluralism of forces resonating and feeding back on their compared strengths. Sectarianism is the death knell of the left as much as centralization is. And in this regard, we continue to welcome experimentation with different tactics, even those we disagree with. I like that a lot. I'm in a lot of leftist spaces online. You see a lot of arguments and nitpicking about individual politics, like even amongst anarchists or amongst MLs, you see arguing about that kind of stuff. And I think that it does more harm than good for sure.
What it says is sectarianism. This, yeah, Foucault argues that the left intellectuals are the masters of truth and justice. So they always have to come out with something new, right? Because they are the conscience of all. So in this case, they are still, working on a new, like he's saying, a new way to maybe moderate capitalism or not destroy completely.
Could someone explain sectarianism, please?
When your ideology or truth that can be broken into separate pieces that are all distinguishable from each other and all kind of mutually exclusive, and that disagreement can kind of break into tribe. I hate using the word tribe because everyone uses it. Tribalism or different factions. So it's the ability of people who agree with each other to aggressively disagree with how they agree with each other, which I guess.
I mean, I think the way it looks online is like we've started calling it gatekeeping, like aggressive gatekeeping, or like the overstipulation of allyship, where it's like you have some idea about how every fucking person in the world has to be, and then like, and you probably just came to that conclusion like last week, but now you think everybody should already be where you are on this, and like if they show any sign that they're not where you think they should be, it's just like complete disavowal. You're not even like my comrade anymore. You're a fucking, and it's just like, yeah, there's like turfs and tankies that are just like downright despicable, sure. But then there's also like, and there's liberals and centrists who are downright despicable, sure. But as an admin on a couple of like left book pages, it's like how quick people are to call other people these terms that are meant to like dismiss you. It's like basically the moment I can box you up as a liberal, a tanky, or a turf, you're basically fucking done. Like, and that's, there's no point even talking right now, right? So it's,
I'll call this a be like me disease.
I've got the be like me's real hard right now.
Yes.
Bad case of the be like me's.
And a lot of servers I'm in on Discord, that's where I talk most of the time. They've got ideology roles. So
no.
Yeah. Yep. It causes more problems than it solves for sure. Because basically you get into a discussion with someone and then they'll start to get mad. They'll look in your roles. They'll say, mutualist, markets suck. And then that's the end of the conversation. That's how it goes almost every time. I removed all my ideology roles ages ago because people do that constantly.
Wow. But it's part of part of a thing. So factionalism on campus at Boise State. Here's a concrete way that it's bothersome for me. It's like I want to organize intersectionally, and I get critiqued for not being intersectional enough, even though I fucking bend over backwards in my mind to try. I go to special interest groups on campus for marginalized people. I sit in on these things, But at the end of the day, though, just because you're fucking just because you're a woman, or just because you're queer, or just because you're black, doesn't mean that you're a fucking leftist. And so it's just like you've got to get around a certain set of principles before you can just kind of stack those up. Otherwise, you just assume the basis as our reality as it is, which is neoliberalism. And then the only thing you can fight for is a little bit more diversity on, representation on the board or whatever, which matters though. And that's the other part is like in this struggle for me, organizing like that, there was a little bit of time where I felt resentful, like maybe this is all just divisive. But then I'm like, well, but trying to just whitewash things and say, but no, now we just need to all get together around socialism still isn't enough. And I think the panel some of us saw on intersectionality a couple weeks ago shows how these kinds of divisions are still like pretty rife, and that that if you're like an orthodox Marxist who just really wants to go back to the good old days when people weren't trying to hash this out or something, or if you're one of these people who thinks that identity politics was the thing that undermined Occupy, it's just like, look, we're not going to be able to go back. We have to learn how to take another step forward where we kind of take the lessons of the last couple decades. So what would it look like to have more intersectional, expressly anti-capitalist like organizing on campus, for instance? Because if you get half of each of these groups on campus to actually show up for, like, say, occupying the quad, there'd be like 150 of us, right? You have the Latinx, you have Afro-Black Student Alliance, you'd have Taco Tuesdays, you'd have Sustainability Club, Climate Change Club, NSP, probably some of the people from the Poli-Sci Club, probably some of the people from the Economics Club, the Native Americans Tribal Council, and I think I'm still leaving out like 3 or 4 other ones just off the top of my head. But each of these groups averages 10 people, but they can, if they really try, like pull like 30. And so if you really like pushed to like shut shit down for like a week-long conversation or something like that, it would be possible. But then what? What's on the other side of that? And that's, I think, kind of the despair that these authors are feeling, is that even when you can, though, it's what are the material like changes that can be affected? And are they just saying that everyone should go get STEM degrees and we'll figure it out later? Is that no?
That's about where I'm at.
I said a lot. I meant to just kind of like bring up a lot, so take it away. I'm done talking.
Okay, well, you just mentioned, like, is there a solution that everyone should just go get STEM degrees? And I was really interested in what they post is, like, the goals, the first one being to build an intellectual infrastructure. And I wanted to talk more about that. I feel like that never really is discussed in the solutions and how to solve all of this. So, like, what exactly would that constitute? Like, building an intellectual infrastructure, how would we achieve that?
Easier access to education, and easier access to the type of classes where you give deep thought about why things are the way they are, because you sure as hell don't want to do that in high school, middle school, or preschool. I didn't bring up those last two. But intellectual infrastructure is just something that would naturally come about when you, I guess, decommodify, if that's the right word, education. They can get easier for people to access without literally enslaving themselves. Sure. So it's just something that naturally, it's something that just naturally it's something that would kind of naturally generate in a world without markets, especially without market education.
So in their longer work, Inventing the Future, they go into this type of stuff, and part of what they think we ought to be doing is, in a sense, copying the strategies and protocols that neoliberalism used to come to power, which involved creating these various institutes, having think tanks, all of this type of stuff. And that's where their critique of folk politics comes in. And they think that, look, if we're going to gather any sort of momentum and power, we have to, in a sense, play this game of institutes, think tanks. I mean, I think we could also say that YouTubers like ContraPoints and the rest of them, philosophy too. A lot of them are already doing this when it comes to YouTube, but it's not that Cernacek and Williams are against folk politics through and through. They just don't think that marches or protests are going to get us where we have to be to be able to deal with stuff like climate change and stuff that requires global action.
Michael, would you think that protest is an act of folk politics?
Yeah, I think they do.
See, I always think of folk politics as like local political, just small time political movements. So something like local vorism is a folk political movement.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I think they would say stuff like, I mean, if the idea is if Trump comes to Kansas City and 50 people go outside the building and hold up signs, that type of protest, yeah, I think that they're going to count that as a kind of folk politics.
Yeah, I just thought it was in line with like the quote from Jody Dean that Goldman Sachs doesn't care if you grow chickens or whatever.
Right.
Localism destroyed.
Well, because it's because this sort of politics feeds into neoliberalism, right? Because it if you suggest that you can have a local solution or a folk political solution to the problem, then it buys into the market strategy of neoliberalism, right? If you have a problem, fix it yourself. Let the market correct for it, right? And this sort of local or folk political movements buy into that narrative by thinking that if we have a problem, let's fix it ourselves. That's really neoliberalism allowing the market to fix the problem.
Yeah.
So like when I was writing on Detroit, I was thinking about various sort of folk political movements, such as so for instance, there's this one movement in Detroit where this community has created its own sort of counter currency where they have a time bank, and you volunteer your time doing various tasks, and then as a result you get time saved up in the time bank, and you can trade that in for other people to do various sorts of tasks. So that's one movement in Detroit. Another movement I was thinking about was urban farming, and there are big urban farm communities in Detroit, and there's these liberal sort of thinkers that posit that if we just keep pushing these sorts of movements, that we can overcome all of the terrible things that exist in the contemporary world. And I think the critique of folk politics is to suggest that no, these sorts of movements are not going to defeat capitalism. We need a unilateral, singular, large-scale political movement in order to defeat capital. These sorts of folk political movements have their value for sure. They're integral to a survival strategy in many political landscapes, right? But they're not going to defeat capitalism. And I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I just think it has to go beyond thinking in terms of protest movements.
No, I agree, and yeah, they just are. Again, they go into this more in inventing the future, but they talk about how after what happened with the Soviet Union, leftists got very nervous and scared, and of large-scale political movements. Right? It was this aftermath of finding out about what went on in Soviet Russia that leftists were like, okay, well, this type of large-scale bureaucratic approach, we can't go in that direction anymore. And part of what they want to do is say, look, we don't have any choice. We have to go in some sort of direction like that if we want to deal with the global issues we're facing. And so, just to support what I was trying to say earlier, here's the quote. They say, "We do not believe that direct action is sufficient to achieve any of this. The habitual tactics of marching, holding signs, and establishing temporary autonomous zones risk becoming comforting substitutes for effective success. At least we have done something is the rallying cry of those who privilege self-esteem rather than effective action. The only criterion of a good tactic is whether it enables significant success or not.
I love that. I love that. And then there's also like this part of me that's like, well, I mean, okay. So there's something great about being able to go to the Capitol and meet other people who give a shit about the world, and that it's the closest you can come to a public square in the real world, like outside the internet at least, right? Like you go and you find other people, they're riled up, they give a shit. And it's like, the world's pretty alienating place. I've met some really cool people going down there. Probably, I don't know, Kenneth, maybe you?
Say again?
I don't know if we met because of a protest downtown, or a rally.
I feel like I've known you half of forever, but it's only been since December.
Yeah.
The organizing.
Oh, the DSA.
For the DSA.
That's right. Okay. But a bunch of the people that I've met through the DSA, I originally met through this thing or that thing at the Capitol, or in front of the City Hall. But part of the problem is just that there's so many things to go there for, and you basically have to make it a lifestyle change where you're always going there. And then like a day where you went out canvassing or went out to the Capitol is a day when you did not do any reading or writing and, preparing for something bigger later. So it's just like, there's this constant trade-off, and I feel like resentful I can't do it all. And so there's always this question of like, okay, but what's really effective? And how do I measure, as a person who doesn't attend all of the things, which ones are really worth showing up for?
Well, A, it's a question of opportunity cost. And B, if you spread yourself too thin, you end up like the Red Queen. You have to run faster and faster to stay in the same place. So how you cut up that pie, it's up to you.
I wonder what they would say about things like Rojava and other autonomous regions like that. Because while they're not necessarily hurting global capitalism, they are hurting capitalism in their region. Rojava and the organizations around it, YPG and the YPJ, are their military branches, they have done more to fight ISIS than any of the other local groups have done, or the large-scale governments, even Syria or Turkey, or even U.S. involvement in that situation. Rojava has done a lot to hurt ISIS in that regard, and they're pretty much entirely autonomous and separate from Syria and Turkey at this point. Which is localism, but
you're asking what would...
Yeah, because I would argue that it's definitely localist. It could fall under folk politics, I suppose, but it is hurting capitalism in its own way.
Is it really? Like, I mean, hasn't the U.S. supplied Rojava with weapons?
Sure, they did.
So if that was the case, then they're not hurting capitalism.
Yeah, because the U.S. doesn't supply arms to anything that hurts capitalism, right? Well, I mean, in theory. I mean, because like really anything. I mean, even like there's a certain sense in which anything that gives them an excuse to up the surveillance state or just security state is old. Even if it appears as a crisis, it's going to cost us money or something like that. It gives them like a more of an excuse to state build, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I don't know enough about. I have no idea about the YPG or J. Yeah. Is this the ones that are primarily run by women and they're anarchists?
YPJ is the women's branch of it, basically. YPG is inclusive. Yeah, they're mostly anarchist. They're based on democratic confederalism, which is Abdullah Öcalan's own creation, which is based on Bookchin's communalism, basically, which is a critique of anarchism. He thinks it's not ecological enough, and he thinks that he critiques lifestyle anarchism, which is to him people who, they walk the walk, but they don't talk the talk. They act like anarchists and they dress like punks, and maybe they squat buildings even, but they don't they don't do any action. They're not actually organizing. They're just calling themselves anarchists, and that's all they're doing.
Right. I'm bucking the system, man. Yeah.
Yeah, so democratic confederalism comes out of communalism, which is a critique of that. So it's definitely more organized than a lot of traditional anarchist organizations. It's more formal.
Well, I think this is what Jacob was touching on, though, about how it's definitely like necessary for survival, though. And like
Yes,
in their case,
for sure.
it's obviously like probably a thorn in the side of a bunch of people, probably of the U.S. right? Like, but.
So like I haven't read enough into this, but I think that there's a critique to be made of a critique to be made of this critique of folk politics, and I think that it would come from Black studies, and I don't know enough about this, but I think I just started reading Habeas Viscus by Alexander, I can't say his last name, Wahili, and I think Black studies could provide a framework to suggest that like these survivalist politics do matter on a molecular scale, and then we could use like a Deleuzian framework to suggest that the molecular actually affects the molar in ways that we can't perceive. Yeah. By suggesting that like Black struggle was integral to the abolition of slavery, and that these micro actions that would appear localist and survivalist were actually integral to the molar and the large scale action that occurred with the abolition of slavery.
Right, and and then Negri and Hart in Empire, right, talking about how there is no global versus local, really, especially, and I don't know if they said because of the internet or if that was me. I gotta have to go back, but basically though, like any locale constitutes a site between those two things, because those two things are really more in our head than anything else, and that any site, I mean, if you think about it, like we're all plugged into the internet, and we have like this relation to the internet, and so we're not doing things in isolation from the rest of the world most of the time. And a lot of the things that we do, behaviors, thought patterns, even like changing certain habits are coming out of the internet, shaping actual structure on the ground, that it might have like these imperceivable effects that are priming things for certain kinds of big time shifts that would be unprecedented 10 years ago or something.
It's interesting that you bring up Hart and Negri. Slightly anachronistic, since in many ways Sternesek and Williams are responding to Hart and Negri.
Yeah, I could have just used Deleuze and Guattari because all they were doing was using Deleuze and Guattari, but I just don't know if they're doing it right or not, so I'd rather just cite them. Also anachronistic because, well, there's a lot of reasons, but yes, fair enough.
You're not wrong. You can make that. It's just interesting that I think they're responding to Occupy, which kind of flows out of Hart and Negri.
Okay.
Hey, I just think it's important to note, though. I mean, it's easy to kind of read them and think, oh, they're just against folk politics, but that's not it. It's just they're just trying to say that for our problems we're facing on a global level, folk politics aren't sufficient to answer those. It's not that they shouldn't exist or we shouldn't engage in them. It's just that we have to not rely on them solely for, for our answers. And so, to quote them again here, you look at the quote, right? They say, "We do not believe that direct action is sufficient to achieve any of this. Oh, wait, that's the other one. Let me go down here. We believe the most important division in today's left is between those that hold to a folk politics of localism, direct action, and relentless horizontalism, and those that outline what must become called an accelerationist politics at ease with a modernity of abstraction, complexity, globality, and technology. The former, folk politics, remains content with establishing small and temporary spaces of non-capitalist social relations, eschewing the real problems entailed in facing foes which are intrinsically non-local, abstract, and rooted deeply in our everyday infrastructure." So the key there is the former remains content. It's saying their main criticism is saying we cannot just remain content with localism, direct action as being sufficient to deal with our problems. We have to go beyond them. But that's not an outright denial or negation of them either.
Cool.
There is also, just want to read point 2 and section 2. We experience only the increasing speed of local comparison, a simple brain dead on rush rather than acceleration, which is also navigational and experimental process of discovery within a universal space of possibility. This is the latter mode of acceleration, which we call as essential. I think that there is an impediment in the US to get this universal, is the state rights. There is also speeches by conservatives, but they are not, they are more politicians of the Republican Party that always tell that the US government shouldn't interfere in US states' state rights. So it's people tend to focus on the states, the province, and they also watch local news. They don't watch national news. So this is part probably of the problem, the U.S. isolation to the world, because there is not only national police or national policies. Cities rule have power on the police. There are shootings in other towns that there is not one action by the president because they cannot interfere in these problems. So that's probably is the main problem of the U.S. is state rights to get the universal approach.
We're kind of getting at how there's like this emphasis always to like let's limit what the federal government does. Let's focus on what the state government does, and how that's a kind of enforcement of this. It's a limitation of our imagination to think on these larger scales, or definitely discourages us to act in solidarity on any kind of larger scale, right?
There are good examples from before the 2000 in Latin America that labor unions all in many cities join and go to the capital with the same let's say purpose. So they want to get rid of corrupt politicians, but they join. They just, even without social media, they just by the radio or TV, they just join and go together. But today we have social media, but they're more separate, is what I see. Probably need a common message that is not getting. it's what you said before that about YouTube. Everybody has their own channel and with their own preferences.
So, but like going back to the manifesto, the point is not to be nostalgic for that old time. The point is to think using this technology, right? To selectively affirm components of the technological apparatus to use to our advantage.
So I'm curious. Okay, so we never really got to Quinn's point about left versus right accelerationism. I think we'll probably like close out here in the next like 15 minutes, at least for official broadcasting. But like, let's make sure to touch on left-right accelerationism, and then like, if anyone doesn't consider themselves an accelerationist, like I'm really curious because like it almost just sounds like nothing really controversial has been said here, that anything controversial that gets applied to accelerationism is really just like people are saying something that's not really there. And it's all actually not that controversial. It's like, so I'm curious if anyone is like, no, I've actually got like a fundamental issue with something here, because right now it's been all like, yeah. So, but let's start with left-right accelerationism. What is that?
Basically, left accelerationism wants to utilize this. Basically, it's outlined in here. So they want to utilize existing technology and tools and capitalism, go beyond capitalism into socialism. Basically, like with Marx's idea that capitalism is it's the best system so far, but that doesn't mean there's something better. Whereas right accelerationism is more to do with pushing everything forward towards either a technological, either towards a technological singularity or towards collapse. Basically, they want to accelerate towards collapse until forcing it to collapse upon itself. And usually that's one branch of it. It's all very like there's a lot of different branches within right accelerationism even. And then there's also unconditional accelerationism, which is more of just the critiques, and it's kind of between the two. It's kind of merged the two. It really depends on who you're asking.
Is it that it's just saying like accelerationism, and it's either going to work out for people or it's going to fuck everyone over? I'm just like down with
pretty much. Unconditional is basically like it takes the critiques and it runs with them in whatever direction that may be.
I would like to have a point about, I would like to talk about unconditional accelerationism, because I just saw the notion popping up on the web, but never really read something about it. And I just typed in the sideboard, I would like to talk about the place of politics in right accelerationism and left accelerationism, and maybe also in unconditional accelerationism, because the question, if I got it right, I think the basic view of capitalism in accelerationism is that it works like a systematic, it works in a systematic and almost autonomous way, not really, no matter what humans do, they are more or less bound by the way capitalism works. And then the question, okay, how to behave towards this systemic functioning, and if right accelerationism is like, okay, we go with this, then where is the politics in this? Isn't it just, okay, it's pure economic functioning, nothing more? And okay, we can see, and then okay, how does left accelerationism behave toward this economic systematic functioning? How does it? Yeah, where is the politics if it's not just okay saying, yeah, let's nationalize means of production or so? And I think that's an important point. which I don't know that much about, and just have the question.
I mean, with the right accelerationists being just economics, it's like, I mean, that is neoliberalism in the first place, is that there is no society, there is no like government only insofar as like to prop up the economic, infrastructure or stay out of its way. The government's job is to fight government to stay out of its way, right? Like, God, that'd be really nice. I could just be a right accelerationist. I wouldn't have to fucking worry about anything ever again. Perfect. Someone bring.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's completely true.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't.
No. I think you're right in terms of it being like neoliberalism, carte blanche, right? It's like let the market flow however it will, because like in Land's case, Land sees capital as he doesn't see it as oppressive, right? He sees it as a purely deterritorializing force, because he doesn't read 1,000 Plateaus. But I think there is a politics insofar as like Land promotes like a techno-utopian vision, like a techno-utopian fascism, right? And the promotion of such a fascism is still a politics. It's a politics that posits that we shouldn't limit technological progression. It's a politics that promotes technological that technology should be free to create, and that we should be free to create whatever we want. We shouldn't place limits on technology, and that's a politics because it's not simply a determinism. It posits a teleological understanding of the market, but it doesn't posit a teleological understanding of politics, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it could be argued as well. It's important to note that I don't think Land wasn't, when he wrote most of his important writings, Benjamin is the name of the collection of essays, but Meltdown is one of the most popular. When he was writing those, he was a critical theorist. He was a Marxist or a post-Marxist, according to some. I don't know if he identified with either one. But he was coming with Marxist critiques. Since then, he's now a member of the neo-reactionary movement, which was widely influential on the alt-right and is considered to be the intellectual strand of the alt-right at this point.
In as much as intellectual.
Yes. But at the time of the writings, he was still a Marxist, so I don't think like we can. I see a lot of people discounting his writings because they say, "Well, he's a fascist now." That means he couldn't have written anything good. I don't think that's fair to discount his writings, even though he's now a fascist for sure.
I think Tegan definitely agrees with you, and she couldn't make it today, but she said as much in the past. So she read Fang Newman. So.
I've read a few essays out of it. Meltdown.
I don't think Fang Newman is really worth reading. Having read large swaths of it, I don't think it's worth reading. I actually find his neo-reactionary stuff better than his leftist stuff.
I don't know if I've read it.
Like The Dark Enlightenment, I think, is a better read than his stuff in Fang Noumena.
Wow.
The style is the man.
Yeah.
Like, it's terrifying. What he says is absolutely terrifying, but I think it's a better read.
Well, at the end of the day, he's a beautiful writer, right? But Deleuze and Guattarians tend to be like, yeah, he's a good writer or whatever, like as a fanboy, but he does a bad job of like reading D&G. So at least I think I've heard Jacob say something along those lines, but I know I have heard Tegan say something along those lines. So
Jacob,
right. Well, his misreading is he doesn't read 1,000 Plateaus, right? He's stuck in Anti-Oedipus, and he reads capitalism as like a transcendental divine force that isn't reterritorializing.
That was my next point.
Yeah.
You do not see the hand. Do not see the hand.
I just had one question on Jack. To Jack, you just said you think his neo-reactionary stuff is better reading. Do you think, in terms of lining out what accelerationism is for land, or why do you think so? And yeah, in which way is it a better reading?
That's a good question.
Because Fang Noumena doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a mismatch of conceptual jargon that doesn't fit together into any sort of coherent whole. I feel like any attempt to lay out a project on the basis of Fang Noumena is going to be super interpretive and the act of creation on the part of the interpreter rather than anything posited by Land. But that's just my reading of it.
I would agree to a degree. I definitely struggled to extract the politics from it. Like, it was an interesting read. It was a fun thing for me to read. But yeah, extracting politics from it was definitely a difficult thing to do. And of course, you're probably, with anything like that, you're projecting your own politics onto it, and it's your interpretation of his work rather than actually what he's saying. I would agree with that.
You know, and I'm studying Anti-Oedipus right now, and even just, you know, Land's emphasis on deterritorialization, even in Anti-Oedipus, right? D&G are very clear that the problem with capitalism is, while it breaks us out of all coding systems and all of that, which is to say feudalism, for example, divine right of kings, all of these qualitative ordering systems that put people in certain qualitative identities, lock them into place, give them basically essences. Capitalism comes along and says, fuck all that bullshit. That's not going to get in the way of the accumulation of capital. And so capitalism seeks to deterritorialize labor. It takes the serf and literally deterritorializes the serf, and it frees up all of these potentials in labor and in wealth and so on and so forth. And in some sense, that's the liberating aspect of capitalism. That's the side that Marx liked, right? But at the same time, it also reterritorializes, it recodes, because for everything that it deterritorializes, it puts to work for the simple sake of capital accumulation. It reconfigures it towards that end. And even Cernacek and Williams, right, they say, as Deleuze and Guattari recognized from the very beginning, what capitalist speed deterritorializes with one hand, it reterritorializes with the other. Progress becomes constrained within the framework of surplus value, a reserve army of labor, and free-floating capital. And so, yeah, I mean, it's great that it breaks apart all these old codes and overcodes, as they put it. But on the other hand, it just locks everything into a framework geared towards capital accumulation. And in that sense, it stifles progress. It stifles technological development, because if certain technologies could be developed, but they don't have a purpose for capital accumulation, well, they're not going to get developed.
Yeah. That happened with FM radio.
So would anybody say that they have a fundamental problem with the manifesto itself or with accelerationism? Or is anyone on a fence? Is anyone considering themselves one way or the other? I'm just really interested in hearing about that, because it's an ism. Yeah. Do you identify with that ism? And if not, why?
I see most of the ideas in this manifesto. I also saw in the concept of the political, but by Carl Schmitt, when he criticizes the neoliberalism. He talks about depoliticization. That's what you say. Instead of deterritorialization.
Deterritorialization.
Can't
versus
pronounce those words.
territorialization.
So yeah, he's basically saying it's the end of politics, but neoliberalism is promoting the end of debates, political debates, and it's also the neutralization of the political society. He also mentions that the law is just an instrument to neutralize people. And basically, I see many. He also mentions that the meaning of the 20th century is the economic domain and technological domain. Basically, it means that everything is about wages, salary, inflation, and the leaders of these economic domain are technocrats, economics. There are no more statements, people who can, talk about universal, the common thing. It's just more about the money, accumulation of money. So it's similarities between these. But Carl Schmitt wrote the concept in 1930s, 1920s, I think. You read the concept of the political.
We read it. We read it together.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about. I hadn't tied this back to Schmitt's critique of liberalism at all. Actually, that's really interesting. But yeah. So anyone else want to say if they are or not? Jacob, did you?
Yeah, I do not consider myself an accelerationist. And it's for the following reason. So accelerationism posits that we exist within a particular structure, and that in order to escape said structure, we need to accelerate in the right form, we need to accelerate everything. In the left form, we need to accelerate particular components. In doing so, it posits that the only means of resistance comes internal to capital. That the only way to resist capital is internal to capital. And I have a fundamental problem with this because if we posit that capital has an ontologically problematic foundation, then anything that comes out of capital will be ontologically problematic. So, for instance, we can turn to Afro-pessimism for a better way of thinking through this critique. So Afro-pessimism posits that America is ontologically founded upon anti-Blackness, that the foundation of America is violence against the Black body. As a result, anything that comes about from within the United States will always reaffirm that violence against the Black body. So, for instance, we have something like the Civil Rights Movement, which is a reform movement within the United States, and 20 years later, you have the new Jim Crow. In the South, you have the freeing of the slaves. It's immediately followed by the original Jim Crow laws. So the anti-Black, or the Afro-pessimist position is that you cannot have this sort of what Deleuze and Guattari would label a relative deterritorialization, where you're not completely tearing down the whole structure. You're only partially tearing down certain aspects and affirming other aspects in this sort of acceleration. And this is where Cernusek and Williams are really getting their ideas about this sort of left-wing acceleration. As a result, I think that any attempt to have a relative deterritorialization is doomed to failure. And I think this is ultimately where accelerationism is doomed to failure. It attempts to accelerate certain parts of capitalism in order to overcome capitalism. But in doing so, it never thinks fully about it. It never latches on to the outside. It attempts to get outside from the inside, and I think that's an impossibility because we're always doomed to repeat the current system and the problematics within it if we attempt to have a relative deterritorialization. So that might have been a little bit too dense, but
what the heck would be a complete deterritorialization, though?
Well, that's the problem, right? That's the problem with a complete deterritorialization pretty much leads us to fascism. So I don't have an answer, right? Because that's what they deal with in 1,000 Plateaus. They're like this sort of absolute totalizing deterritorialization, at least in a negative sense, leads to a microfascism, and we don't want that. So they tried to come up with this idea of an absolute positive deterritorialization, which I think Cernusek and Williams are trying to do as well, but I think they ultimately fail, and I think they fall back into a relative deterritorialization. So the goal is to figure out how to have an absolute positive deterritorialization. And this is where me and Tegan disagree, because Tegan thinks it might be possible, and I don't. So I hope it's possible, but I don't think it's possible. But that seems to have to be the goal, is to try to think how we could have some sort of absolute positive deterritorialization that doesn't just turn into a fascistic desire.
Another way to frame it is, for Deleuze and Guattari, what they call the socius, which is essentially for them the fundamental aspect of society, the ground of society, the main focal point of society, right? Which is to say, in our society, it's capital, right? Capital is the fundamental organizing principle of our whole world. And so here's the issue. It's like, if we want to say, okay, let's just totally deterritorialize, let's basically get rid of capital, right? Well, our whole world breaks down at that point. If we try to just snap our fingers and say, okay, MC M prime ends right now. Well, the world goes kaput. So then the question is, what do we do? Well, if we just try to go totally outside and break the socius, then yeah, we end up in, fucking Walking Dead, right? I mean, it's nearly like zombie apocalypse. So it seems to me the only way forward is somehow to try to direct capital. I mean, this is where maybe I am an accelerationist, because it seems to me that if we're stuck in this either or, right, at the most basic level, either capital or not capital, I mean, to go no capital at this moment would just destroy all of our lives, as much as we want capitalism to be over. And so the question is, how do we direct capital to get us to a point where we could cease to have capital accumulation? Just a thought.
No, I completely agree. So at the conference in Boise, Richard Wolff said during his talk that he thought that for the first time in his life, he thought that capitalism might be over. And he said this as if it was a good thing. And I sat in my seat terrified, because if capitalism is over, I'm absolutely horrified by what's coming next, given our current trajectory, at least.
Hey, like I say, we're all trained consumers. I mean, there's a reason that George Romero likened zombies to the consumers at the mall. I mean, if the social order breaks down,
Dawn of the Dead.
Right, exactly. So that's the only thing I think about is, we're stuck in this situation. Capital is, I mean, we can argue that as funny as it sounds, that little mechanism, MC M prime, is arguably the most fundamentally powerful mechanism the world has ever seen. I mean, the amount of change that this mechanism has brought about in a few hundred years is staggering. And so then the question becomes, we can't just shut it off right now and be done with it. So what do we do? Well, I guess one of the only options, as I can see it, is try to direct it or accelerate it in some direction that would lead to a post-capitalist society somewhere in the future.
Is it like a 2 or is it one? It's not square. Is it
It's kind of.
It's just a little
Yeah.
like that. Sorry, I was putting MCM prime on the whiteboard, Mikey. Don't
Okay. That's money to commodity to money plus surplus or augmented value. So you start with X amount of money, right? Liquid money. You invest it in the production of a commodity, and through the extraction of surplus value in the production process, when you go and sell the full amount of the commodities, you end up with more value than you started with. And that's Marx's formula for capital accumulation, the most basic form.
I wrote it out and I used the time energy symbol to say it's like you go from money sign, dollar sign to commodity to more dollar sign, but in parentheses, because time energy, which is to say because of surplus time and energy, because some people did not get compensated more than
right. So in the production process, right, you pay the worker a certain amount, but and this is one of the things D&G like to highlight and other leftists highlight, right? In feudalism, you knew what day you were working to produce the stuff you needed for your immediate consumption, and you knew what day you were working for the lord or the master, right? The differences were very clear cut. Now I'm working for me and my family. Okay, now I'm working for the ruler. Whereas in capitalist production, that line gets totally blurred. At a given moment, you don't know if you're working to earn your wage or if you're giving surplus value. It becomes very blurred. But the point is, the capitalist will pay you, whatever, $10 an hour, and within that hour, you end up producing more value than your wage is worth for the hour. So the point is, if you essentially get paid to produce 6 commodities, you end up producing 10. So when he goes to market and sells those, he ends up with a profit.
It's kind of strange when he said that Dr. Richard Marxist said that that capitalism might be over, but Karl Marx
it's on its way. He thinks we're closer to a point where it could happen. Yeah.
According to Karl Marx, he said that developed countries will be the image or the reflection of developing countries. So some developing countries start to become capitalists. In Asia and Latin America, they just probably the U.S. is in the last stage, but they just started, and I don't think it's impossible that today capitalism might be over.
Maybe Jacob, you a few minutes ago, when you talked about Deleuze and I don't know if it was Deleuze and Guattari, but you said if capital is ontologically if capital is problematically ontologically grounded, and then you referred to Afro-pessimism, that in Afro-pessimism the USA is ontologically grounded on violence against Black bodies. What do you mean with ontologically grounded in something?
I mean that its foundation. I mean, to use sort of jargony language, that its foundation in the last instance is grounded upon that violence. So that you can't consider America as a concept without that violence against Black people.
So, but is that America as ideological concept or the ideology of Americanism or something? Is that or
material?
Is that
I would use it materially,
because I just really like that meme about how the socialism might work if it came out of America, because America, because we would be the only country not invaded by America.
I mean, sure, but like that socialism might still have violence against Black people, right?
Yes.
That's the intersectional critique, right? That the end of capitalism doesn't mean the end of racism,
Right.
and vice versa. The end of racism doesn't mean the end of capitalism.
So would you say then that, well, okay, so I guess I would say that I'm an accelerationist insofar as I had to choose between localism, horizontalism, focalism, direct action versus the non-local, like efficient, productive, hierarchies, abstract, infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. Like I'm going to go with the latter. But at the same time, though, that to really deal with injustice, which is why do we even care about outgrowing capitalism? Injustice. So to deal with that, though, there's a lot of that local stuff that's still necessary, but also that like accelerationism in the terms we use in the class I teach is like a technical solution. It's a bunch of technical solutions for non-technical problems. Obviously, climate change is a non-technical problem insofar as if everybody is worried about it and actively like working to like change our behaviors on this planet, then it would go, we could mitigate it or something, right? But so climate change is a non-technical problem in that sense, but like we generally want to fix it technologically. So it would, but it would require a shift in human behaviors at a scale like that we don't know. I don't know. I doubt that policy and greener energy and more just social systems would alone give us what's necessary to change our relationship with desire itself, or with how we form in groups and out groups or something, right? But at the same time, like something like a broad universal ethics, like founded on precarity and cohabitation, and solidarity and all of these kinds of things could still work if enough people were just really disillusioned, because enough like big crises all kind of hit at the same time, and people were basically just fed up with the meaninglessness of the kind of lifestyle we have now. Was that a question? I don't know what I was doing.
That was more of a statement.
I was summing up where I'm thinking.
Good statement too.
Summing up where I'm thinking.
No.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think I just think we have to think resistance differently than we typically do, because our resistant efforts so often, if they are successful, turn into the very thing they were resisting. Mm-hmm. And to me, we can think about this in terms of a genealogical process where when we overcome something, where we overcome something in a particular manner, we adopt the very logic and structure of that thing. And so in order to completely overcome something like capitalism, it can't come from within. It can't come within the logic of capitalism, because then whatever comes after is simply going to contain that same logic. And in that way, it can't think outside insofar as it comes from within, right? So if your entire thought is grounded upon anti-Blackness, I don't know, maybe it'd be better to think about it in terms of like criminal justice. Like you can't think of you can't simply think about the abolition of prisons. You have to think about like an affirmative, different way to think about criminal justice. I don't know. I'm struggling to articulate it, but it can't just be like I think the right to say it just can't be a pure negation. But I think you have to be able to think outside of the confines of the structure. Like not even think outside the confines. You have to like work outside the confines of capitalism in order to overcome capitalism. And I think that's a struggle for accelerationism, because it's working within the confines of capitalism.
I'm just curious.
I guess if I have any, oh, go ahead.
Okay, I'm just curious about what Jacob said, that he said that the end of racism is not the end of capitalism. And I'm not sure that you say later that the end of capitalism is not the end of racism, but we haven't experienced that yet. What are your reasons to, or are you predicting, or have you said that, or maybe because it's,
Like, do you want me to respond?
yeah, because you said the end
I
of
just
capitalism.
mean there's a lot of, like, I know a lot of Marxists who are racist and sexist.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I can imagine a world of egalitarian class relations that still have racial antagonisms.
Well, so this is why we're trying to outgrow both capitalist realism and reactionary politics, because because you can be anti-capitalist and just be a total reactionary. So, did I interrupt you?
I think.
Yeah, I was just gonna say this is a question of. Yeah, no, I don't remember. Yeah, it's if you assume that racism and sexism and other forms of bigotry were enhanced as part of a capitalist social project, then yes, you could have a social society that contains a lot of racists, contains a lot of bigots, but because capitalism is not there to perpetuate this hatred necessarily, then I'm not saying can or couldn't, but can it die out within some series of generations? Because these things are perpetuated because someone can take advantage. All this antagonism is perpetuated because someone can take advantage of it, and we might not even notice it at this point because it's so deeply ingrained into the system. So eventually, in a socialist system where there's no such thing as profit motive, and there's no such thing as the constant insatiable power, you might run out of fuel. Racism and such might run out of fuel. And the only way you get those types of things again is just by just happen to meet someone who's actually a new type of person, and then just having a bad relationship with them, which is just like, oh yeah, you'd expect someone to have this feelings after a bad experience. And I don't know if that's something anyone can respond to, but yeah.
I think that's kind of the point that Douglas Lane kind of made at the end of the intersectionality panel. It seems like he was arguing with Tegan, right? And he was saying that he thinks that, because Tegan was saying that racism, sexism, xenophobia from colonialism, whatever, all kind of operate in their own sort of ways. They're all enmeshed with everything else, but that you make capitalism go away, they don't go away. And Lane was basically I think he thought that it does, that basically racism as we know it is so fundamentally capitalistic thing.
As we know it with capitalism fuels racism. Without capitalism, racism would just run out of fuel. Yeah, that's what I meant in 5 seconds. And you still have those things, but just not in the way that we experience them. Or there's a new girl. Oh, this is the first girl that we've ever had in class. She's got cooties, and just make random stuff up, but not systemic things. We won't have systemic things anymore. We'll just have cooties.
And on that note,
so we got one T-shirt on the way. It's gonna say, diamonds out, avocados in.
Yep.
Which is then we'll have one that says systemic shit out, cooties in. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, it's been great, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. We went overtime because this was really good. So thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone have any last words?
the Red Queen has won the race.
See you, everybody.
Bye, Jacob.
Thank you for joining.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.